If you're active in the emulation community or one of our subscribers, you probably already know that Yuzu has been discontinued, along with Citra. And honestly, that day felt like the end of an era. These two emulators were giants in their space, and their shutdown left a lot of people confused and disappointed. But as the saying goes, when one door closes, another opens. Soon after the shutdown, we started seeing forks of Citra popping up. We even made a video about them as well, where we shared our opinion on which one we thought was the best 3DS emulator for Android at that time. Things were looking great again for 3DS emulation on mobile.
And now, with new forks showing up, we have to say, Azahar might be one of our favorite ones so far. It's fresh, it's promising, and best of all, it's still in active development. That alone makes it stand out, especially in a scene where many emulators become abandoned or stop improving after a while. But let's set some context first. On our tablet, Citra MMJ still has the edge when it comes to raw performance. It runs faster and smoother in general. But Azahar brings something else to the table: better accuracy, fewer visual glitches, and improved stability. It's clear that Azahar is focusing on getting things right rather than just running things fast. Now, to give you our honest opinion after testing a lot of games across Azahar and other Citra forks, if you're on a low-end device, or if a particular game isn't running well on Azahar, then yeah, Citra MMJ is still the best option. But if you're rocking a mid to high-end device, then Azahar is the emulator you should seriously consider. That said, performance still varies depending on the game, so don't expect miracles across the board.
And as always, unlocking the full potential of any emulator comes down to understanding its settings. We always say this: don't blindly copy settings from random sources. It's way more important to understand what each setting does and how it affects performance and visuals. That doesn't mean we're totally against copying settings, though. In fact, our favorite approach is this. If something isn't working right, sure, go ahead and copy settings from a game testing channel. But don't stop there. Adjust them based on your device and your preferences. That's how you truly get the best experience. But here's the good news. After watching this video, you probably won't need to search around for game testing settings anymore. Because by the end of this, you'll have a solid understanding of how Azahar works, and you'll basically become a pro in 3DS emulation. Hello everyone, it's Kuro and Violet here, and today we're talking all about the Azahar emulator. We'll go over some game testing so you can get a rough idea of what to expect from your device, and then we'll dive deep into every important setting, from cheats to mods and everything in between.
We know it's cliche to ask, but if you enjoy the video after watching it, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. We're asking now because we won't be interrupting you again in the middle of the video. It can get annoying, and we want you to enjoy the content without distractions. With that said, let's get started. Before we dive into game testing and settings, let's quickly talk about ROM formats. In the Azahar emulator, only the .cci format is supported. That means if you have a 3DS ROM, you'll need to rename the file extension from .3ds to .cci. And yes, it's really just that simple. But keep in mind, this trick only works with 3DS files. If you have ROMs in other formats like CIA, you'll need to manually convert them using additional tools. As far as I know, this limitation was introduced by the Azahar devs to help reduce piracy. But honestly, I don't fully understand how this helps, especially when all it takes is a simple renaming. In the end, it just feels like an extra step that adds inconvenience for regular users. That said, I can still see where the devs are coming from. The Citra project has always been a risky one. Nintendo has already taken legal action against it in the past. So the Azahar devs are probably just trying to play it safe by adding small hurdles that help them fly under the radar, even if it comes at the cost of convenience. To get around this limitation, there's actually a fork of Azahar called Azahar Plus that supports .3ds files directly. So if you're someone like me who values convenience in emulators, that might be something to keep an eye on. I know I might get a couple of scoldings from some of you in the comments for even mentioning this, but hey, I'm just a big fan of making things as simple and user-friendly as possible when it comes to emulation.
Now that we've talked about ROM formats, let's move on to the games I tested. So, I actually tested a lot of games on Azahar, over 50. But to keep this video concise, I'll only be covering a handful of them here. If I went through all of them, this video would easily become an hour long. So for those of you who are interested in full testing, I'll be uploading a separate gameplay tests video soon. Also, just a quick reminder, I upload all those gameplay test videos on Violet's channel, so make sure to check her out if you're into game testing content. Alright, now let's get into the games. New Super Mario Bros. 2 ran without any issues, smooth gameplay, no visual glitches, just plug and play. Kirby Planet Robobot also ran really well, though I did notice a small bit of stuttering in the beginning. I think that's just shader compilation, which is pretty normal on emulators, especially during the first playthrough. Metroid Samis Returns surprised me in a good way. It ran great in terms of performance, and I could even crank up the resolution without much trouble. Definitely one of the better experiences. One Piece Ultimate World Red worked fine too. No issues popped up during my testing. FIFA 13 ran surprisingly well. I expected it to struggle a bit due to the number of players on screen, but it handled everything pretty smoothly. On the other hand, Mario Kart 7 did show some slowdown, especially when a lot of players were on screen at the same time. When there were fewer racers nearby, the game ran much better. So it's kind of a mixed experience. Now, moving on to some fighting games. Street Fighter IV ran pretty well overall, but I did notice some occasional frame hiccups, especially when doing moves like Shoryuken or Hadoken. It's not a deal breaker though, as it only happens sometimes. Interestingly, Citra MMJ had the same issue, but it happened far less. Maybe once or twice throughout the match. So it's almost negligible there. Data Live Dimensions also had some stuttering here and there, but it's still very much playable.
Super Mario 3D Land with the beautiful 1080 HD texture pack had a minor issue when jumping and attacking, but after playing for a while, it becomes unnoticeable. Still, it's something to keep in mind, and don't worry, I'll also guide you on how to install the HD texture pack. Resident Evil Revelations had slowdown during door opening animations. I suspect it might be related to my device's hardware. In these kinds of cases, lowering the visual quality and accuracy settings can help. Personally though, I prefer using Citra MMJ when these issues show up. Outside of that, Azahar provides a much more stable experience. Also note that I didn't tweak the settings for most games in this video, which is something you should keep in mind too. Lastly, Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D didn't run too well. It's still playable, but not the smoothest experience. For games like this, I'd recommend sticking to Citra MMJ instead, at least on devices like mine. So yeah, from these tests, I think you get the idea. Azahar excels in stability and accuracy, since it's the direct continuation of Lime 3DS. It's ideal for those with high-end devices. On the other hand, Citra MMJ still takes the lead in raw performance, as it was made specifically for that purpose. But since it's based on an older Citra version, you might run into some issues with game accuracy or compatibility. Again, we've tested way more games than what we showed here, so keep an eye out for that upcoming gameplay showcase video if you want the full picture. Now that you've seen the gameplay performance, you probably have a good idea of what to expect from this emulator, especially since a Snapdragon 860 with 6GB RAM is a solid middle ground for comparison. But keep in mind, some of the issues I mentioned might not show up if your device is more powerful than mine. And yeah, a few of those problems can be fixed by tweaking certain settings. I'm just lazy and willing to sacrifice visuals on my big screen tablet for the sake of smoother gameplay. Anyway, enough gameplay talk, let's get into the settings. And what better place to start than with GPU drivers? A lot of people ask me about this in the comments, even though I already explained it in my Switch emulator guide video. Still, I get it, so let me break it down again. GPU drivers are basically software that translates the emulator's rendering code into instructions your phone's hardware can understand. Think of them like subtitles in an anime or a foreign series. Without them, you'd be totally lost. The emulator speaks its own technical language, and the driver makes sure your GPU knows exactly how to draw everything correctly on screen.
On Android, you can really only make use of custom GPU drivers if your device has a Snapdragon processor. That's because Snapdragon is more open, especially when it comes to GPU-level access, and it uses Adreno GPUs. That's why you often hear about things like Adreno or Turnip drivers. But if your device doesn't have a Snapdragon chip, chances are it's using a Mali GPU. Unfortunately, Mali is more closed off. There's not much public info or documentation, and developers usually don't focus on it. That's why you rarely hear about Mali drivers, unless you're deep into the geek world. Now, when it comes to Snapdragon, there are mainly two types of drivers you'll come across. 1. Turnip drivers. These are open source Mesa drivers. They're commonly used and compatible with many Snapdragon devices. The performance and compatibility might vary depending on your device, so you'll have to test a bit to see which version works best. Personally, I just use the most recent one available because I'm lazy. 2. Adreno drivers, aka Qualcomm official drivers. These are specific to certain GPU versions. To use them, you'll need to know which Adreno GPU your phone has. You can check that using apps like CPU-Z. Let me give you some quick examples. If your device has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 with an Adreno 750 GPU, you can use the Qualcomm driver V744.112. If you have an older device with something like Adreno 640 or below, then something like V690 should work better.
Connect Arctic Base. This setting allows you to stream and play your actual 3DS games directly from your real console. No need to dump or convert your games first. It works by connecting the emulator to your 3DS, which must be running the Arctic Base server plugin, forwarding the game data in real time. You can even use your 3DS as a controller if you enable that option. Essentially, this lets you broadcast your 3DS gameplay to your mobile device, tablet, or PC. Tablets and PCs with larger screens can especially benefit from this, as you'll be able to enjoy your games at higher resolutions and with added emulator features. This feature is particularly useful for low-end tablets or PCs that struggle to emulate 3DS games natively. After all, if your device can already run 3DS games well through emulation, there's little reason to stream them instead. But for underpowered hardware, Arctic Base provides a great workaround, as long as both devices are on the same Wi-Fi network.
Install CIA files. This setting lets you install updates and DLCs, which are sometimes essential if you want to use mods. And since I mentioned mods, let me quickly explain how to install them too. First, download the ROM hack or mod you want. Inside the zip file, you'll usually find a folder named after the game's title ID. Now, copy or cut that folder, then go to your Azahar emulators directory. Navigate to Azahar, Load, Mods, and paste it there. If the folder doesn't exist, just create one manually named Mods, and then paste the mod files there. After that, launch the game and the mod should load automatically. No extra steps needed. And don't worry, sometimes mods take a little time to load. That doesn't mean your game is frozen, so just wait a bit.
Since we've learned how to dump and apply mods on the 3DS, let's talk about the types of mods you'll encounter. Not just limited to 3DS, but relevant across platforms like the Nintendo Switch as well. This knowledge is especially useful when emulating games, where some issues can only be fixed through mods. For example, in Yuzu, Zelda: Link's Awakening has a known graphical glitch that can only be fixed using a mod. In such cases, knowing which type of mod to look for can save you a lot of trouble. There are typically 4 types of mods, but I'll focus on the 3 most important ones that you'll come across frequently. 1. EXFs, Executable File System. These mods are used when you want to change how the game behaves. They directly modify the game's binary code to affect gameplay. Examples include disabling intro videos, unlocking the frame rate, skipping tutorials, applying in-game cheats or patches at the code level. Basically, if you're tweaking how the game works, it's likely an XFS mod. 2. ROMFS, Read-Only Memory File System. ROMFS mods deal with the assets and data used by the game, mostly visual or audio content. This includes textures, translations, music or sound replacements, 3D models, UI or map edits. If a mod changes how the game looks or sounds, it's a ROMFS mod. ROMFS Ext. This is like an add-on or extended ROMFS folder. It's used to keep multiple mods organized, stack mods cleanly, e.g. texture mod plus audio mod, avoid touching the base ROMFS structure. Think of it as an external DLC system for mods. A good example is the popular Pokemon Prismatic Moon ROM hack. It uses the ROMFS Ext setup to load its changes without interfering with other mods.
Well, there are many more types of mods out there, but for 3DS, these should be enough. By the way, that Zelda Link's Awakening mod I showed you earlier, it was actually a layered FS type. Now sometimes, Mods can get a little confusing, especially when there's not much context provided. But don't worry, I've already gone through the whole trial and error process, so you don't have to. Let me give you an example. I found this Ghost Trainer skin mod for Pokemon Alpha Sapphire on Game Banana. I downloaded it, extracted the files, and immediately got confused. There was no title ID folder inside. Now that might throw you off, but here's how I figured it out. Since it's a skin mod, that usually means it's a ROM-FS mod. I've already explained how you can identify these. So once you've confirmed that, here's what to do. 1. Open your Azahar directory, then go to Load. Mods. Your Pokemon Alpha Sapphire title ID. ROM-FS. 2. Remember earlier we installed the Star Sapphire mod? Let's delete that first so there's no confusion. Now go back to the Ghost Trainer mod folder and look inside the full folder. There you'll find a folder named A. This is the key part of the ROM-FS structure. Just copy or cut this folder. Paste it back into Azahar, Load, Mods, Title ID, ROM-FS. And that's it. Now launch the game and boom, your Ghost Trainer mod is successfully applied. Cheats. There are 2 types of cheats you can use in Azahar, and both are super simple. First method, manual cheat input. Let's say you want a 60 FPS cheat. Just go to a cheat website like gbaytemp.net and find the code for your game. Once copied, open Azahar, press and hold the game you want to use it with, and select Cheat. At the bottom right, you'll see a plus icon, plus, tap it. Now, give your cheat a name and paste the cheat code in the box at the bottom. Once done, save it, and that's it. Your cheat is ready to be enabled. Second method, using pre-made cheat files from GitHub. I'll provide the GitHub link in the description. Just go to the link I gave you and... Oops, wrong link, wait a minute. Okay, now, just visit the correct link and look for your game. Tap on it and download the cheat file from there. Once downloaded, copy or cut the file, then go to your Azahar Cheats folder and paste it there. Now, open Azahar again, press and hold the game you added the cheat file for, tap Cheat, and you'll see a full list of cheats ready to be enabled. Just toggle whichever ones you want, and that's it, you're good to go.
Let's head to the General section, where you'll find Limit Speed and Limit Speed %. These settings let you customize the speed of your games. Let's say a game isn't getting stable FPS. Maybe the frame rate keeps jumping from 45 FPS to 60 FPS back and forth. That can make the game feel inconsistent or hit or miss. In that case, you can cap the FPS to 45. Sure, it'll feel a bit slower, but it will be constant, making the game feel smoother overall. You can also speed up games that involve a lot of grinding, just like playing Pokemon Emerald at 2x speed on a GBA emulator while leveling up your Pokemon. You can do the same thing here using this setting. One thing I see many people get confused about. This setting is not the same as an FPS mod. Let me clarify, this won't magically increase your FPS. It just speeds up or slows down the game. If you want more FPS, you'll need to use mods or cheats made for that. Now let's head to the system settings. New 3DS mode. This setting is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll still explain it since not everyone is deeply familiar with the 3DS family. Just like other consoles, Nintendo released different variants of the 3DS. The original 3DS, the 3DS XL with a larger screen, the 2DS without the clamshell design, and then the new 3DS, which actually had better hardware. You can think of it as the Pro version of the 3DS. But unlike other Pro versions, like the PS4 Pro, which mostly enhanced existing games, the new 3DS also had some exclusive titles that wouldn't run on the older models because the original hardware just couldn't handle them. And some exclusive are just for exclusivity. Anyway, enabling new 3DS mode in Azahar allows you to run those exclusive titles. If you're curious, here are some notable examples. Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, Fire Emblem Warriors, Minecraft New Nintendo 3DS Edition, The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, Runbow Pocket. There are a few more, but if a particular game catches your interest, you can always look it up by just Googling it or asking any AI chatbot like ChatGPT. But that's not all. Even some regular 3DS games run better when this mode is enabled. You'll get benefits like improved frame rates, reduced loading times, and smoother gameplay. Theoretically, at least. So yeah, new 3DS mode sounds like a dream, right? Well, it kinda is, but there's a catch. If you have a decent device, you should definitely enable it with no hesitation. But if you're using a low-end or older device, then you should enable it only when necessary, like for exclusive games or games that clearly benefit from it. Some homebrew apps or certain games might even run worse with this setting on, so don't be afraid to disable it if something isn't working right.
Before moving to the next setting, let's quickly talk about something important. Low-level emulation, LLE, versus high-level emulation, HLE. LLE, low-level emulation. This method uses the actual system applets dumped from a real 3DS. That means you're running Nintendo's original software within the emulator. More accurate emulation. Requires applets dumped from your own 3DS. Slightly slower performance, but better compatibility in some cases. HLE, high-level emulation. This is where the emulator mimics the behavior of system applets instead of running the original software. Faster and simpler. Doesn't require any dumps. Built directly into the emulator. May have minor bugs or behave slightly differently compared to the real system. Now, about the next setting. Use LLE Applets. If you enable this, Azahar will switch from HLE to LLE mode, but only if you've dumped your 3DS applets properly. This makes the emulator feel more authentic and can improve compatibility with some games or features. But here's the catch. If you're not familiar with modding or homebrew, don't mess with this setting. Dumping applets incorrectly or using someone else's files can lead to serious problems, even bricking your 3DS if you're doing it on real hardware. So only go for this if you know what you're doing. Enable required LLE modules for online features. This option allows you to enable online features in Azahar, but only if you've dumped the required modules from your own 3DS. It's a cool feature, but I'll say it again. Do not use this if you've downloaded someone else's dump or grabbed files from the internet. Not only is it risky, but it can also mess with online functionality or cause unexpected bugs. Play coins are a virtual currency on the Nintendo 3DS earned by walking with the device. They're used to unlock features or buy content in games like Street Pass Me Plaza or Puzzle Swap. This setting allows you to manually add play coins, which can be helpful if you're using an emulator and can't earn them through walking. It's especially useful for unlocking Street Pass features or in-game items that require play coins. After that, the rest of the settings in the System Settings menu are pretty self-explanatory. But before we wrap it all up, let's talk about the last two options, because they're connected to something called 3GX plugins. And trust me, they're worth understanding. 3GX plugins are tools originally designed to enable real-time cheats or mod menus directly inside the game, just like what you'd see on a hacked 3DS using Luma 3DS. In theory, this means you could do wild things like spawn items, walk through walls, toggle features instantly with a cheat menu inside the game. But here's the catch. Azahar doesn't currently support full in-game mod menus or real-time cheat pop-ups. Yes, the emulator can load 3GX plugins, but you won't see cheat menus show up inside the game itself, at least not yet. Most mods, like 60 FPS patches, HD textures, or infinite money, still need to be enabled through Azahar's UI, not in-game. So for now, this system acts more like a back-end framework. It works, but not to its full potential yet. 1. 3GX plugin loader. This setting tells Azahar to scan your emulated storage and load any 3GX plugin files, like PLG or bin, when a game starts. These can include things like gameplay tweaks. If this setting is off, nothing will load, even if you placed all the right files. Turn it on if you're using mods, advanced cheats, or performance tweaks. Turn it off for maximum stability if you're just playing games normally. And just to clarify again, even though the mods themselves might work, the cheat menus won't appear in-game yet. Before we talk about the second setting, let's quickly understand what Homebrew is. Homebrew refers to unofficial apps or tools made by the community, not by Nintendo. These are often used to unlock features or customize the experience. Examples include custom save editors, file managers, mod launchers, debug tools. But Homebrew doesn't stop at tools. It can also mean indie games made by developers for fun, unofficial ports of games that were never released on 3DS. And personally, I'm a sucker for homebrew games. Someday I'm seriously thinking about making videos dedicated just to them. But hey, that's a topic for another day. Let's get back to the settings. Allow applications to change plugin loader state. This setting allows homebrew apps to enable the 3GX plugin loader on their own, even if you turned it off in Azahar's main menu. Basically, it gives trusted apps permission to temporarily override that setting when needed. Turn this on if you use homebrew apps that rely on 3GX plugins. Leave it off if you don't run any homebrew and want the safest performance. Update, Kuro from the future here. Earlier, I said it wasn't working, though to be honest, I don't even remember where I read that anymore, probably some random forum. Anyway, after a lot of trial and error, I finally managed to get a plugin called PokeReader working. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but first, let me show you how to use plugins in Azahar. I'll be using PokeReader with Pokemon Alpha Sapphire in this example, but you can test other plugins too. Anyways, let me guide you. First, download the plugin, PokeReader in this case, from the website. Then open Azahar and enable the 3GX plugin loader option. Next, copy the .3gx file you downloaded, go to the Azahar directory and open the SDMC folder. Inside that, create a folder named Luma. Inside Luma, make another folder called Plugins. Inside Plugins, create a folder named after your game's title ID. Now paste the .3gx plugin file inside that title ID folder. Before starting the game, you might need to update it. I'm not sure if every game requires it, but for Alpha Sapphire, the update was necessary. The problem was, the game just wouldn't update in the regular version of Azahar. I tried multiple times. Not sure if I was doing something wrong or if it's just a bug. So I ended up using Azahar Plus instead, and it installed the update in seconds. That's why I mentioned Azahar Plus earlier. To update the game, just go to Settings, install CIA files, then select the update.cia and install it. To check if the update worked, look at the game's logo. If you see a version number next to it, that means it's updated. If the number doesn't show, close the emulator and reopen it. It should appear after that. Note, you have to download the update separately from some website, which I can't share here. If I do, the video might get demonetized, and I really can't afford that. But I know you guys are smart and can figure it out yourselves. Now launch the game, and yeah, the plugin is successfully injected. But there's a catch. The frame rate drops badly after injecting the plugin, to the point where the game becomes pretty much unplayable. Unfortunately, I don't have a solution for that right now. Hopefully the Azahar devs fix this in a future update. So yeah, technically it works, but also kinda doesn't at the same time. You might be wondering, but Kuro, why do we even need 3GX plugin cheats when you already showed us how to use regular emulator cheats? Well yeah, for most people, 3GX plugins might seem kinda pointless, but once you enable them, you can actually pull off some crazy stuff. Sure, emulator-based cheats can handle the basics, like walking through walls, unlimited money, and that kind of thing. But can they give you a specific shiny Pokemon? Unfortunately, no. That's where 3GX plugins come in. They let you do advanced cheats that can be super helpful for specific goals. So yeah, most of you can probably skip this setting, but if you're after that extra control, it's definitely worth exploring.
Since I've never really used the camera section myself, and most of you probably won't either, I've decided to skip it. It's not that useful in most cases, and honestly, covering it would just eat up more time. I can already tell this video is going to cross the 30-minute mark, which I'm really sorry about. Now let's move on to the graphics section. Graphics API, this setting determines how the emulator talks to your device's GPU to render the game's visuals. You'll usually see two options here. Vulkan. Perform usually the faster and more efficient option, especially on modern Android phones. It can take better advantage of multiple CPU cores, resulting in smoother gameplay and better frame rates. That said, some games might show visual glitches depending on your device and drivers. Number 2, OpenGL-ES, often more stable on older or mid-range devices. It's not as fast as Vulkan in most situations. It's a safer choice if Vulkan causes crashes or graphical issues. Enable SPIR-V shader generation. In graphics programming, there are many different types of shaders used to render visuals. In Azahar, the emulator uses shaders to emulate the Pika GPU from the 3DS. There are two primary shader types you'll encounter in Azahar. One, GLSL, OpenGL shading language. I'm guessing this is the default shader used by the emulator. It's a traditional choice, widely used in OpenGL-ES environments. GLSL is stable and compatible with a wide range of devices, especially older or mid-range ones. SPIR-V, Shader Portable Intermediate Representation. SPIR-V is a newer, low-level shader language used with the Vulkan API. It's designed to be more efficient and optimized for modern graphics hardware, offering potentially better performance and compatibility when using Vulkan. Enabling SPIR-V shader generation switches the shader from GLSL to SPIR-V. This means the emulator will generate the shaders using the more modern SPIR-V format, which can improve performance and graphical rendering, especially on devices that support Vulkan. If you're using Vulkan, You'll usually want to keep this setting enabled, as it often leads to better performance and smoother gameplay. However, even with Vulkan, some games might perform worse or show glitches, in which case, you can try disabling it. And if you're not using Vulkan at all, then you want to keep this setting off, but you can experiment if you have time.
Enable asynchronous shader compilation. When a game runs, it uses shaders to render effects like lighting, fire, water, and other visuals. These shaders need to be compiled before they're used. Normally, if asynchronous shader compilation is disabled, the emulator freezes the gameplay whenever a new shader needs to be compiled. The best example I can think of right now is, if you've ever used RPCS3, then you might have noticed how games pause for a few seconds, and then resume. That pause? That's shaders being compiled in the background. But 3DS shader compilation isn't as heavy as RPCS3. In 3DS emulation, you'll just face quick stutters or pauses, especially in new areas or when lots of effects happen at once. By enabling this setting, shaders are compiled in the background, letting the game keep running smoothly. You might still see a placeholder effect for a moment, but the gameplay won't freeze. It improves performance and makes the experience smoother, but it also uses more processing power, so low-end devices might struggle, lag, or even overheat.
Internal resolution. This setting lets you customize the game's visual quality based on your device's power. The higher the resolution, the sharper the visuals, but it also demands more performance. In Azahar, you get a range of options, from native resolution all the way up to 10x native. That's great flexibility, but you should pick the one that suits your device. Personally, I find 2x native to be a sweet spot, clear visuals without too much performance drop. But if your device can handle more, feel free to push it higher for crisper graphics and at the same time. Linear filtering. This setting smooths out the jagged edges and pixelation in textures, especially when the game is upscaled. It can make the visuals look softer and less blocky. In Azahar, turning this on can help older 3DS textures blend better when you're using higher internal resolutions. But keep in mind, it's a matter of taste. Some people prefer the original sharp pixel look, especially for retro-styled games. I recommend testing it both on and off to see which look you like better. Accurate multiplication. This setting improves how the emulator handles certain graphical effects, especially in games that use complex texture blending or shading. Turning it on can fix visual glitches like missing shadows or transparency bugs in some titles, but it might slightly reduce performance depending on your device. That said, Azahar, being a long-developed fork of Citra, has already addressed most of these graphical issues. So in most cases, you can safely keep this setting off for better performance. Only turn it on if you actually run into any visual problems during gameplay.
Disk shader cache. Think of this like watching, long corn online. When you stream it and keep skipping scenes, it buffers a lot. Kinda ruins the experience, right? So what do? You download it first so you can enjoy it smoothly without any interruptions. Disk shader cache works the same way. It saves important visual data, called shaders, so your game doesn't stutter every time something new appears on screen. It's especially useful for demanding games with lots of effects. For lighter or simpler games, like Shorter Corn, you might not need it and can leave it off. But for smoother gameplay, especially in heavier titles, it's best to keep it enabled. Texture filter. This setting enhances how textures appear by applying upscaling or smoothing techniques. It's mainly used to make low-resolution or pixelated textures look cleaner, but it can affect performance depending on which filter you choose. None. Default setting. No enhancements are applied, giving you the original texture quality. It offers the best performance and most accurate visual output. Ideal for players who prioritize speed or authenticity. Anime 4K, a sharp and clean filter, especially effective for anime-style or cel-shaded games like Project Mirai DX or Phoenix Wright. However, it's quite demanding and may drop FPS on weaker devices. Bicubic, a basic smoothing filter. It softens jagged edges slightly without consuming much power. Useful for a slight polish in most games like Super Mario 3D Land or Animal Crossing. Scale Force, more advanced, aiming to upscale while preserving detail. Best used on 3D-heavy games like Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon or Resident Evil Revelations. Slightly heavier than Bicubic. SPIR-V, great for smoothing and upscaling pixel art or cartoony textures. Works well with games like Mario & Luigi Dream Team or Pokemon Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. It offers a good visual boost but can be taxing on performance. MMPX, high-quality scaler that focuses on edge clarity, often performs similarly to XPRZ. Might benefit games with a mix of 2D UI and 3D models like Fire Emblem Awakening. Slight performance cost. Note, any option other than none can reduce performance, especially on low to mid-range devices. If you experience lag, consider switching back to none. Recommendation: low-end devices can do with none or bicubic. Mid-range, maybe XPRZ or Scaleforce cautiously. High-end, feel free to experiment with Anime 4K or MMPX depending on the game's visual style. Delay game render thread. When a game runs, the CPU processes instructions and logic while the GPU handles rendering visuals. For smooth performance, they need to stay synchronized. If the CPU sends data too quickly for the GPU to keep up, it can lead to stutters or frame pacing issues. This setting introduces a small delay, giving the GPU more time, like a brief pause, before it starts drawing frames. In Azahar, you can even customize this delay from 0 to 16,000 microseconds. But here's the thing. This setting is strictly for advanced users. There's no universal number that works for every device or game. It completely depends on your hardware and the title you're running. So unless you understand your device's performance in detail, it's best to leave this at the default 0. Use it only for experimental purposes if you're troubleshooting or testing for smoother frame pacing. Before we move forward, let's briefly talk about the stereoscopy and VR section in Azahar. Stereoscopy refers to the 3D effect that was one of the Nintendo 3DS's main features. It created a sense of depth by rendering two slightly different images for each eye, kind of like how our real-world vision works. Citra tries to replicate this effect through stereoscopic 3D mode, and even has some settings for VR headsets like Google Cardboard. But here's the thing. Most of us are playing on regular smartphone screens, not VR headsets or stereoscopic displays. Enabling these options won't really enhance your experience, and in many cases it can actually reduce performance or cause visual issues like flickering. So to keep things clean and practical, I'm skipping this section in detail. If you're someone who really wants to experiment with VR or 3D effects, you can explore these settings on your own, or if you really want me to explore these settings, then I will try. But for 99% of users, it's safe to leave everything here at default. Dump textures. When this setting is enabled, it tells the emulator to save all the textures the game loads during gameplay. These textures are saved as image files in the dump textures/game ID folder. It's mainly used for texture modding, like upscaling the game's graphics, changing a character's clothing color, or even giving the grass a fresh new look. But unless you know what you're doing, we don't really recommend turning this on. It can create confusion, and might slow down performance while the emulator is busy saving every texture. And even if you're using a powerful high-end device, replacing textures can sometimes cause issues. Because remember, the game still thinks it's running on a 3DS, and it was designed to work with downscaled textures for a reason. So unless you're a modder or just feel like experimenting, it's better to leave this off. But here's one thing we do recommend. Check out the next setting, where you can load HD texture packs made by experienced modders. That way, you get the visual upgrade without the hassle. Now, to use an HD texture pack, the first thing you need to do is turn on the custom texture setting in Azahar. After that, you'll need to download a texture pack from a trusted source. I actually know a great place where you can find HD texture packs for some games, but not every game, so keep that in mind. If I find more sources in the future, I'll definitely add them to the pinned comment. For now, go to the pinned comment or the description of this video and copy the link I've shared. Paste it into your browser. It'll take you to the Patreon page of Henrico, who's an amazing creator. You'll need to create a Patreon account to download the texture packs, but don't worry, it's completely free. And if you want to support his work, feel free to do that too. Once you're on the page, you'll see a list of games. Let's use Super Mario 3D Land as an example. Scroll down, find the game, and click on it. If your device is powerful enough, you can go for the 4K texture pack, but I'll stick with the 1080p version here. Click it, and the download will start. After the download is complete, Extract the zip file using any file manager app. I personally like to use Z-Archiver, but you can use any file manager app. Once it's extracted, open the folder, go into the one that says 1080p, then into User, Load, Textures. You'll find a folder with the game's textures in it. Now just copy or cut that folder, go to your Azahar directory, then into Load, Textures, and paste and replace everything there. And that's it, you're done. The next time you launch the game, it should load with the upgraded HD textures. Note: the HD texture folder must match your game's ID. This is important because different regions often have different game IDs. If your game's ID doesn't match the name of the HD texture folder, simply rename the folder to match your game's ID.
Lastly, async custom texture loading. Alright, so this setting works only if you've enabled custom textures and are using an HD texture pack. When this is turned on, the emulator will load custom textures in the background while you're playing, instead of loading them all up front during startup. This can reduce game loading time and make things feel smoother, especially with big texture packs. But there's a small catch. Since textures are loading while you play, you might notice a short delay before a custom texture appears. Sometimes, the original texture might show up briefly before being replaced. It's not a huge issue, but just something to be aware of. So if you want faster startup times and can live with textures popping in during gameplay, keep this on. But if you prefer everything to load before the game starts and don't mind waiting a bit longer at the beginning, then turn it off. Personally, I like to keep it off. Now let's quickly talk about the layout section. This part is honestly pretty self-explanatory. You can stick with the default layout or use one of the pre-made ones, depending on what feels comfortable to you. But if you're not satisfied with those, you can go for a custom layout. Just a heads up though, this part can be a little weird, because instead of dragging things around like most emulators, you have to adjust everything using axis values. Yeah, it's a bit complicated. If that sounds confusing, don't worry. You can always use ChatGPT to help with positioning, or even copy the layout from someone else who has the same device as you. So yeah, it's flexible, but takes some effort if you go the custom route. Now lastly, let's talk about the debug section. As always, debug settings are mostly meant for advanced users and developers, so you don't want to mess around with them too much unless you know what you're doing. But there are a few options here that can help you crank a little more juice out of the emulator. So I'll explain everything clearly. Just keep your focus. CPU clock speed. This setting controls how fast the 3DS CPU is emulated. By default, it's set to 100%. You can increase it to improve performance in some games, but be cautious. Overclocking can generate more heat, which may lead to thermal throttling or long-term issues on your device. It's a useful option if you're trying to squeeze out extra performance, especially on more powerful hardware, since you have control over how much you want to push the emulation. On the other hand, lowering it can help reduce CPU usage, but setting it below 100% often slows down games or causes strange behavior, especially in demanding titles. So unless you're experimenting with light games, trying to conserve battery on a low-end device, or carefully tuning for performance, it's best to leave this setting at 100%. CPU JIT, just-in-time compilation. This setting controls whether the emulator uses JIT, just-in-time compilation, for the 3DS CPU. When it's enabled, the emulator translates 3DS code into your device's native code on the fly, which makes everything run much faster and smoother. It's one of the most important settings for performance. Disabling JIT will force the emulator to interpret every instruction one by one, which is extremely slow and only useful for debugging or very specific testing purposes. So yeah, always keep this on unless you're a developer trying to debug something specific.
Enable VSync. When turned on, it helps eliminate screen tearing by syncing the game's frame output with your device's display refresh rate. While this can make the game look smoother visually, it can also increase input lag slightly or reduce performance on lower-end devices. If you're not noticing any screen tearing, it's usually safe to keep this off for maximum performance. But if your gameplay looks choppy or torn, try turning it on and see if it improves things. Debug Renderer. This is a tool mainly meant for developers or advanced users to visualize how the emulator is handling graphics rendering behind the scenes. When enabled, it replaces the normal graphics output with a debugging view. showing things like draw calls, geometry, or how objects are layered. It's not meant for regular gameplay and will make the game unplayable or look weird. In short, leave this off unless you're testing or developing for the emulator. Enable hardware shaders. This option allows the emulator to use your device's GPU to handle shading effects instead of relying purely on the CPU. Enabling it can significantly improve performance and visual quality in many games, especially on devices with decent GPUs. In most cases, you should keep this enabled as it offloads work from the CPU and allows for smoother gameplay. Disabling it might help on rare occasions if a game has graphical glitches with it on, but that's uncommon. Unless you're troubleshooting a specific issue, it's best to leave this enabled for the best balance of performance and visuals. Flush log output on every message. This setting controls how the emulator writes debug logs. When enabled, it forces the emulator to write every single log message immediately to the log file. This is useful for developers trying to catch crashes or specific bugs, especially if the emulator crashes before logs are fully saved. But for regular users, it's not recommended because it can slow down performance, especially on weaker devices. So unless you've been asked to enable this for bug reports or you're troubleshooting a crash, keep it off. Delay start with LLE module. This setting is for very advanced debugging and doesn't affect normal gameplay. Again, LLE stands for low-level emulation, which tries to emulate the hardware more accurately. When this option is enabled, the emulator will delay the game's start until the LLE module is fully ready. It's mainly used by developers for testing or troubleshooting timing issues, so again, not for regular users like us. Deterministic Async operation. This setting controls how the emulator handles timing and multi-threaded tasks. When turned on, it makes these operations behave the same way every time you run the game. That's what deterministic means, predictable and repeatable behavior. This is mainly useful for debugging, testing, and development. So it's also mainly for developers, not for regular users. Lastly, there are two more things I want to talk about, because I think they're actually pretty important. First, is an issue you might run into in games like Tomodachi Life if you haven't uploaded your own system applets from a modded 3DS. I've already warned before, modding your 3DS can be risky. If you mess up, there's always a chance you could brick your system. The problem is, without the official applets, you won't have access to MIIs. And that becomes a big deal for games like Tomodachi Life, which literally require MIIs to function. Without them, you won't be able to customize characters. And honestly, that's a huge shame, because it's such a fun game. But don't worry, I've got your back. I'll be providing a zip file that includes the necessary MII data. I actually got it from someone who generously shared it, so if you end up using it, make sure to thank them in the comments. Here's what to do. First, download the zip file. Then extract it using any file manager. I personally use Zarchiver. Inside the extracted folder, go to the user directory, select everything inside, then copy or cut it. Now head over to your Azahar folder and paste it there. And that's it. Your MII-related issues should now be fixed, and you'll be able to fully customize your characters in games like Tomodachi Life.
Secondly, let's talk quickly about custom overlays and themes. Right now, Azahar doesn't support them, but they are available in older builds like Citra MMJ. And since Azahar is the most promising Citra fork right now, I believe it's only a matter of time before overlay support is added. That said, I won't be making a separate video on overlays just for Azahar. So instead, I'll show you how it works in Citra MMJ. And don't worry, when the feature comes to Azahar, the method will most likely be the same. Also, if you're open to using Citra MMJ, it's still a very solid option. It's been around for years and is quite stable. So here's how you install themes in Citra MMJ. I'll leave a link in the description or pinned comment. It'll take you to a Telegram group where you can find theme zips. If the link isn't working, it's probably because YouTube asked me to take it down. In that case, just search Citra theme in Telegram, you'll find the group. Once inside, pick a theme you like. I found one that looks great, so I'll download that zip to my phone. Next, cut or copy the zip file and go to your internal storage, Android data. Scroll down to the Citra folder, go into the theme folder, and paste the zip there. Now open Citra MMJ, go to Settings, select the theme you just added, and you're good to go. You might need to resize the screen or buttons the first time you enable a theme. But once that's done, it should look and feel great. I've been using this one for a while now, and I really like it.
And that's it. You're now officially a pro at 3DS emulation on Android. From mods to cheats and everything in between, you've got it all covered. Thanks a lot for watching. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. I make these kinds of videos to help people get the most out of emulators, and your support means the world.
Got a specific emulator you want me to cover in a future guide? Drop it in the comments. Just make sure it's not one we've already covered. And if you want to see more from us regularly, don't forget to check out Violet Emu 2. Want to master Nintendo Switch emulation? Click here. More into Windows emulation on Android? Click here. Once again, thanks for sticking around. This is Kuro and Violet, signing off.